Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this standard grant webinar. Before we start, I do want to share some Zoom instructions just to get us all situated in. So as an attendee to this webinar, you'll be able to listen in with your computer audio. Alternatively, you could also call in using the above number and the webinar ID associated with this meeting. This is recommended if your internet feed is unstable. As an attendee, you will not see the option to turn on your camera. Later on, there will be a question and answer session. Questions can be submitted throughout the presentation via the Q&A portal, which is at the bottom of the window, and they will be queued up on our end. We don't recommend entering questions into the chat because it may get buried and we won't be able to monitor the chat box for inquiries. So if you would like to ask your question verbally, you could always use the raise hand feature, and it will place a hand icon next to your name to notify us, and we would then be able to call out or to unmute you, and you could ask your question verbally. Lastly, if you called into the meeting via your phone, you could press 9 to raise your hand and 6 to mute and unmute yourself. All right. We will be referencing the 2023 standard grant guidelines throughout this workshop. So you might find it helpful to have it open in front of you as we go along the presentation. You can download the guidelines at valleywater.org/standardgrants by clicking the laptop icon on the webpage, which is also pictured here. I'll also be dropping a link in the chat right now so that you could directly download it onto your device. And so we could, additionally, we also emailed the guidelines as an attachment earlier today for those of you who RSVP to the workshop. And we'll go ahead and drop that into the chat and give you a few minutes if you wish to download it. 1 second. Okay, oops. Okay, so the link to the grant guidelines is in the chat, so you may go ahead and click on it and follow along. Okay, and I'll go ahead and pass it off to Kristen to kick us off.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today to learn more about our Valley Water Standard Grants for fiscal year 2023. My name is Kristen Yasukawa, and I'm the Community Benefits Program Administrator. So I oversee our Safe Clean Water Grants and Partnerships Program and our Public Art Program in the Office of External Affairs here at Valley Water. We are very excited to share this year's funding opportunities, and we hope this workshop is informative to provide you with some helpful tips along the way so that you can develop a strong project proposal and learn more about our process. But first, we'd like to just start off with introducing our team. So I guess I will start with our panel with Robert.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. Hello, everyone. My name is Robert. I am a staff analyst with the Grants and Partnerships program here at Valley Water, and I will be leading the Refill Station grant program, which we will briefly mention later on in this presentation. And I'll pass it off to Peggy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the workshop. I'm Peggy Lamb, Senior Management Analyst in the Grants and Partnerships program, and I primarily support leading these standard grants. I'll pass it over to Chelsea.
My name is Chelsea Busick. I am with the Community Benefits team as well, and I'm leading the mini grants, which we'll also talk about today. I'll pass it off to David.
Hi, Hi, I'm David Kane. I'm the risk manager here at Valley Water, and I'll be talking about the insurance requirements. Passing it back to Kristen.
Thank you, David. And I will pass it next to Michael and then Ben.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Lee. I'm the environmental planner. I'm with the environmental planning unit here at Valley Water. and I assist with any environmental reviews of any grant applications that we receive. Thanks.
And my name is Ben Huang. I'm an associate engineer for the Community Projects Review Unit. Our unit is in charge of reviewing and permitting external projects.
All right, thank you. We appreciate our subject matter experts for being available today to answer any technical questions that come up. All right, we can go to the next slide. And this is just going to be a brief overview of our agenda today. So as you can see, we have a lot of information to cover. We do encourage you to follow along using the standard grant guidelines document that Robert shared earlier. And all of the materials that we're sharing today, the links in the chat, the slides, the recording of the workshop today will be posted on our website afterwards. So if you want to refer back to it after the workshop, you will be able to do so. Because we have a smaller group today, we do want to encourage everyone to just ask questions along the way, and we can, make this a little bit of a back and forth as well, because I know everyone has different situations, different projects coming from different organizations. So please just use the raise your hand feature or the Q&A feature to submit those. And then just want to put out there that at the end of the workshop, we're going to be sending out a survey to get your feedback on how the workshop went today, and so that we can continue to improve and make these workshops something that's really useful for everyone. All right, so now we'll just go right into our presentation, and I'll hand it over to Peggy.
Thanks, Kristen. So yeah, just a little bit of background on Valley Water. If you're unfamiliar with us, we are the Santa Clara Valley Water District, also known as Valley Water. We are a public agency that's a special district of the state of California, and we are most known as the wholesale drinking water provider for Santa Clara County, but we also manage the region's waterways and flood protection activities to create healthy creeks and ecosystems. Valley Water's missions shown here are for clean, reliable water, flood protection, and healthy creeks and ecosystems. And so each of our funding opportunities are based on these 3 pillars. Next slide. Our outgoing grant funding opportunity is administered by our grants and partnerships program team that we just introduced ourselves. The funding opportunities under this program is funded through a approved special parcel tax called the Safe Clean Water and Natural Flood Protection Program. Our grant opportunities aim to leverage community resources for efficient use of funds and to increase partnerships and community engagement and stewardship activities by working with cities, nonprofits, schools, and other community stakeholders. So in this renewed Safe Clean Water program, there are these 6 different priority areas. Our grant funding is available under priority F, all the way on the right, which is to support public health and public safety for our community. Next slide.
Sorry, give me 1 second. Technical difficulties. Oh, okay.
So within priority F, the grants is specifically within project F9, which are the grants and partnerships for safe clean water, flood protection, and environmental stewardship. Within this, we have 4 funding opportunities: standard grants, which are the larger grants that we're covering today, the mini grants, and the refill station grants, which are $5,000 grant opportunities. We'll be going over that briefly at the end of the presentation, as well as small city partnerships, You can contact us directly if you want to learn more about the partnership opportunity. Next slide. So yeah, the standard grants. Before we start off, you'll notice at the bottom right-hand side of the presentation slide, we do have references to the page number where the information can be found in the standard grant guidelines. So if you're following along, you'll be able to find more details in the grant guidelines. So the standard grant program, what does it entail? There are 5 project types that you can apply under, and that's the water conservation research, pollution prevention, volunteer cleanups and education, wildlife habitat restoration, and access to trails and open space. Last year and this year, we've consolidated the grant funding for increased accessibility with no minimum or maximum amount per project. So we do have 1.4 million available this year, and there's no minimum or maximum, but it depends on how many projects get awarded, and the amount you're requesting will be divvied up that way. All the projects do have a 5-year agreement term, and this is to help reduce amendments to existing agreements. Next slide. Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's $1.4 million available this year, and you may get approved for full or partial funding, and that's up to the approval of our Valley Water Board of Directors. Not all projects that meet the minimum requirements are guaranteed to be funded, and we are seeking a diversity in project types, project locations, and project sizes. We'll go over the different project types and example projects in the later slides. Next slide. So starting off with applicant eligibility, this can be found on page 2 and 3. We're looking for applicants from the following organizations: the local agencies or municipalities, special districts, 501c3 nonprofits, schools, community colleges, or universities, whether public, private, or nonprofit. And then for our water conservation research grants, we do accept applications from for-profit organizations. Next slide. In terms of project eligibility, your project must be located in or provide service to Santa Clara County. We do require a match fund of at least 25% of the total project cost. So that could be monetary or in kind. And in kind usually is like volunteer hours or donated supplies or services. The project must be completed within the 5 years following the agreement effective date. Eligible applicants may seek grant funding for multiple projects. So you can apply, if you have more than one project, you can apply, but you will only be able to get one grant for each individual project. Since we do have 6 different priority types, if you're doing a project that might fit into multiple project types or funding area, we would recommend that you select the project type with the strongest fit, because we will be going over the scoring rubric later, but you know, the project type that you choose will be based on the scoring, so you want to make sure that you choose the best project type. Next slide. Ineligible projects. So the grant funding is not provided for feasibility studies, master planning, mitigation projects, projects designed to meet regulatory or permit obligations, operations and maintenance of projects or programs. And this is existing or new projects or programs, and for land acquisition projects unless it's specifically deemed for use in habitat or species restoration or protection. Next slide. So here's our grant application timeline. Most of the dates here are tentative, but just starting off with the applications being open for proposal. They were open a couple weeks ago on January 11th. We're accepting the applications online using our Flux grants management system. And the application deadline is March 10th at 11:59 p.m. Any application submitted after that time will not be considered. So yeah, we just want to make sure that you get registered in Flux ahead of time. It does take a couple days for us to process your registration, and then once you're in the Flux application, there are questions within each project type that you'll need to fill out in addition to the proposal that you're submitting. So just be mindful of that and make sure you have enough time to do that as well. Right now, we're currently hosting our workshop. So we have the first one today. We have one next week on February 2nd. And then we also have one in on March 1st. So if you start your application early, you'll have the opportunity to attend the next workshops to answer or to ask any questions you might have. So once the grant application closes on March 10th, that's when we'll start doing the pre-review, and our subject matter experts will review and evaluate the grant proposals until March 21st. And then in or around May 23rd, we'll present the evaluated proposals and recommend the grant awards to Valley Water's Board of Directors for approval. Next slide. So after the board approves the funding, our team will provide the award notices to all the applicants. So we expect this to happen around June. If you're awarded, we will then work with you to execute an agreement. We'll work closely with you to finalize the scope, schedule, and budget. And depending on if you were partially funded or fully awarded, we'll need to work on either resizing your scope so that it matches the funding that you were awarded. But we would do that in or around between June to December 2023. During this time, both of the parties will need to sign off on the agreement in order to execute the agreement. And this time it varies due to the complexity of each proposal scope, the CEQA review, permitting, and the grantee's ability to respond to any required follow-up documentations or clarifications. And then following the agreement effective date, that's when you can officially begin working on the project. And yeah, that would be the first day that you can begin requesting for reimbursement as well. Next slide. So now we'll go over the 2023 grant cycles, and the project types and criteria. And I'll pass it on to Chelsea to go over each.
So we have a list of past projects to give you a good idea of the diversity of projects we've funded in the past. Remember, you should only choose, like Peggy mentioned, one project type. If the project fits in multiple categories, pick the best fit. The criteria and scoring information is in the guidelines for each project type. Next slide, please. Thanks. The water conservation research grants are for projects to study and test new or uniquely applied water conservation activities. Applicants are encouraged to undertake research projects of new, repurposed, or innovative water conservation programs and technologies. The primary goal is to identify water-saving devices, strategies that can assist Valley Water with its water conservation efforts. The funded project should be able to measure how much water is saved. This is the only project type that for-profit organizations can apply for. Again, this is specifically for research projects. And some sample projects could include the development of water reduction devices, technology, strategies, or methods, researching cost effectiveness of water conservation activities or technologies, and the development of educational or outreach materials to help the community conserve water. Next slide, thank you. Here's a sample of dripper well replacements that was awarded to Fisher Nickel. You can read more about this project as well as previously funded projects by visiting our grants projects list. And Robert will be adding a couple links in the chat for you to review as well. And next slide, please. The next project type is pollution prevention grants. These grants are for projects that reduce contaminants, including emerging contaminants in surface or groundwater. And some sample projects may include public education to prevent and teach the proper disposal of pharmaceuticals, auto products, gardening products, cleaning products, paints, light bulbs, batteries, electronic waste, and trash. Initiate environmentally friendly gardening and composting techniques such as to reduce use of pesticides and PFAS containing products, and technical assistance to help growers protect groundwater and to keep agricultural pollutants away from surface water, and partnership with schools and communities to organizations to reduce litter, graffiti in our waterways. The next slide is an example of a previously awarded pollution prevention project by the Regents of the University of California for the effective storage and composting of livestock manures. Next slide, please. Oh, there's a question in the chat. It says, can the grants be awarded to projects that have already started? Throw that over to Peggy.
If there's different phases, and Kristen, feel free to jump in. If there's different phases to the project and that phase hasn't started yet, then you can apply for funding for that phase. You just wouldn't be able to be reimbursed for the work that has already started. And if you hadn't been awarded or an agreement hadn't been executed at that time.
Yeah, thank you, Peggy. I just wanted to add too that if you're looking at including some of the work of that I guess that's already started for that project, and it happens outside of the agreement term, then we would not be able to count that as part of the match funds if you needed it to count for match for the agreement. And also it kind of depends too of which activities were done in advance of the agreement, because there are some implications just with our CEQA and getting those reviews done in a timely manner for whatever activities are covered under the grant project proposal. So if you have any specifics, we're happy to help advise you on that offline, if that helps.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide? So next we have the volunteer cleanups and education project type. These grants are for projects that support creek cleanup, education, outreach, and watershed stewardship activities. Unlike the pollution prevention project type, the volunteer cleanups and education focuses more on addressing litter that is already in or near our waterways with an education component. Sample projects include providing education and outreach activities on the need for clean, effective creeks and waterways in under-resourced under-resourced communities, organizing cleanups with volunteers from local schools, developing and implementing curriculum around the relationship between water quality and riparian area health for local businesses and their employees. An example of a previously awarded volunteer cleanups and education project is the Guadalupe River Park Conservancy Watersheds Education Campaign. We're now going to play a short video of the highlights of that project.
Hi, I'm Joe Salvato, Deputy Director with the Guadalupe River Park Conservancy. We're right outside the Visitor and Education Center for the River Park and Gardens. We've been really fortunate to have Valley Water as a partner through their grants program. We see a lot of alignment between our mission and goals for community health and connecting people with nature and each other. And really, the project funding has allowed us to do that. We were able to restore our large aquarium in the lobby. It was dormant for a period of time, and through the grant support, we were able to reactivate it and reestablish two of the fish that you'll find in the watershed, crappie and sunfish.
My name is Ash Namdar, and I'm the Operations Manager at the Guadalupe River Park Conservancy. The grant has allowed us to deploy the Downtown Streets team to these areas. We work in partnership with them and send them out here, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting for us.
My name is Mel Sarmento. I'm the Education Program Manager with Guadalupe River Park Conservancy. I'm very grateful for the funding that we've received from Valley Water and the way that supported our program overall. We had the opportunity to train our staff so that they were able to facilitate appropriate programming, whether that's developmental or appropriate for what they're learning in school, and making sure that we're supporting their education that way. Additionally, we were able to get this fantastic mural behind us. We wanted to really touch on the fact that when students were here at the river, which is actually our field trip access site, that they would be able to see the particular things large scale that they would actually be exploring themselves. Sometimes students don't have the opportunity to access a green space, and the fact that this is such a public and urban park that's located in central San Jose, it really encourages people to recognize that nature and river are not that far away, and it's accessible, and you don't need money to enjoy it.
When you pass by the park and over the bridges, you can directly see the impact of the work that's happening on the ground. When you see the litter be collected, the bags be picked up, people coming back into the park system, it was just more than ever, folks were looking for places to go. And we really felt like through the grant that we were able to respond to the need and support in a time when folks needed it.
People can ride their bikes, they can go on walks. It's not as impacted, and you could actually see a lot of the nature coming through again. There's a lot of green out here, and at some point in time it didn't feel like there was. But with all the trash being picked up, things are looking a little bit brighter out here.
Can we switch to the next slide, Robert, please? And then we have our wildlife habitat restoration grants are for activities such as creating or enhancing wetlands, riparian and tidal marsh habitat, protecting special status species, removing fish passage impediments, removing non-native invasive plant species, and planting native species. We encourage you to look at our One Water document, and it's also referenced in the criteria for this project type that is attached in the guidelines. Here's a quick example of the previously awarded wildlife habitat restoration project. This grant was awarded to the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory for their Establishing Forster's Tern Nest Sites project. And lastly, we have the Access to Trails and Open Space project type. The Access to Trails and Open Space grants are for activities that provide access to creekside trails, open spaces, or trails that provide a significant link to the creekside trail network. Sample projects include construction of a bridge linking two trails together, creation of a trail that provides a significant link to the creekside trail network, activities that support urban trails and encourage community involvement, When preparing the scope of work and planning the project, applicants are encouraged to review the guidance for trail design, which is contained in the guidelines and standards for land use near streams. It has a list of constraints when working on trail projects on or near valley water facilities, along with other best practices for trail design. You can find the link also in the grant guidelines. And our last example project today is the County of Santa Clara's Calera Reservoir Oak Cove Trail construction. Again, you can read more about all these projects and our entire list of previously funded projects by visiting the links provided in the chat. And now I'll go ahead and hand it over to Kristen to go over the proposal requirements.
All right, thank you, Chelsea. Okay, so I think this is what a lot of people are excited to hear more about, which is what we're looking for in a good grant application proposal. So, we'll talk about this, but in the first step would be signing up for our Flux Grants Management System. And then once you're set up in our Flux Grants Management System, you can go to the home page and then you choose the 2023 standard grant application, because we have other applications open at this time. So click on that button and then that will go to the application, and it will also include all of the proposal requirements and addition to some questions, and then a section to upload all of these supporting documents. Everything in detail, again, is in the standard grant guidelines, but we'll go through them right now briefly. So the requirements for the grant application is the online application in Flux that includes the questions, the project scope, schedule, and budget. And there are some templates that are included in the Flux application that will help you with putting those things together. I think they're also available under the resources section on our grants website. If it applies to you, a resolution from your governing body, so if you have like a city council or a board of education or a nonprofit board, then we would need to see a resolution from that governing body stating that they approve with applying for the grant and they will accept the grant if awarded and will follow through with the project. So in the standard grant guidelines, we do have a template of the resolution language that you can use. If you're a 501c3, we will be looking for your 501c3 determination letter. We are going to be looking for W-9 forms for Form 990s or audited financial statements, and as well as an organizational budget. So this is different from the budget that's being proposed for the grant funds. This is going to be your full organization budget for I'm trying to think of what that acronym is. There's a common acronym for public agencies for their audited financial statements and organizational budget. And so that standard document is accepted. If you have questions about this or what types of documentation would meet any of these requirements, please feel free to reach out to our staff directly, because we do know that there's some uniqueness and individuality depending on what type of organization that you are. And then we are also going to be looking for the resumes of key staff. So all of these are going to be attachments that you can upload into the Flux application. All right, so we can go to the next slide. So one key document that will need to be uploaded for your application is a project scope. So a really strong project scope is going to include a brief project summary, clearly explain and identify the location of the project. We do understand some projects are going to, maybe be virtual, or they're going to be open countywide to the public. So it's okay to, say that. It's also okay if you want to describe like, hey, we're going to do educational activities at 3 different county parks. We don't know which ones they are yet, but this is the short list of which ones we're considering. Or something like that, just as much description as you can. And then also the community served and demographics. So for example, if you have a visitors center or you're hosting a program at a certain location, like for example, Children's Discovery Museum, but you're bringing students in from other areas of the county, then where those students come from would be considered the community served in that case of that project, even though there's a separate location. So that's how we kind of differentiate the location versus the community served. And then also listing any project partners. So as it was explained in the beginning, we do, the intent of this grant funding is to leverage, resources that are in the community. So we love really looking and seeing, how our grantees and applicants are working together with others in the community. The next would be project tasks. So we do, when it comes time, if you're awarded and we're into an agreement stage, we are going to be looking for clear and defined project tasks. So that's just taking your big project that you have in mind, breaking it down into smaller tasks and talking about the approach for each task and any metrics and deliverables associated with each task. So some projects, it's very common to say planning, design, construction. Other projects, it could be like we're going to do outreach, we're going to do education, or we're going to do a cleanup component, and then maybe there's a project management or administration task. So those are very common types of tasks that are usually described. And then including any plans for your project operations, maintenance, and monitoring. So we just want to know, like, hey, if you do this project, is there a plan for maintaining it beyond the life of the grant agreement? So if they're coming up with a community garden, who's committed to keep the garden up after the agreement's completed? Or if you're doing plantings, who's going to be monitoring those plantings after the life of the agreement as well. And then another component is going to be describing the project team. So this is where we're going to be evaluating, like, does this project team have the expertise and the experience to implement the type of work that's being described in the scope? One thing that the scope will be used for will be to get the information that we need, that the evaluation panelists need to compare with the evaluation criteria that is set forth for each of the grant project types. So for the water conservation, pollution prevention, volunteer cleanups and education, habitat restoration, and access to trails and open space. So they each have their own criteria table with a point system. So as our evaluation panelists are looking through the scope, they're going to be comparing it with that criteria table. So you do want to make sure that your scope includes all of that information that has actual point values to it. We can go to the next slide, unless there's any questions. I know we just are covering things quickly. But our next slide is the project schedule. So the project schedule is really to demonstrate to the evaluation panelists that the project and the work and activities that you're proposing are able to be completed within the 5-year agreement term that will be able to allocate once if you're awarded, because we do need to make sure that the projects get completed. And so a good way to put together your project schedule is we have the template that's in the Flux application, but usually the project schedule will include the same tasks that were mentioned in the scope, just so it's easy to compare the two documents, and then include a start date and an end date, and have a realistic, like, best estimate. As long as it's within the 5 years, it should be fine. I don't think there's any criteria that gives more points for a project that gets completed earlier than the 5-year agreement term. So there's no, you wouldn't miss out on points there, but we really want to see a realistic schedule. to know that you're really thinking about how long it practically might take to do some of these things. And then the schedule, I know, yeah, is a best estimate, and we won't know who gets awarded funds until May when we take the funding recommendations to the board. So I would say at the earliest, the agreement could be executed around by the end of December 2023. It all depends on the type of project, you know, what it entails, and how ready the applicant or the grantee is to execute an agreement as well. So yeah, I would just say, you know, fall to winter 2023 is probably a good time to start the project schedule. If you want to do it later than that, that's no problem, but I would say that would be like the earliest date to include in the project schedule. And again, you can use any format, but we do provide templates just, you know, if you would like a starting point. All right, we can go to the project budget next. Okay, so for the project budget, that's the same tip as before, is to keep the task names and numbers the same in the budget that you had in the schedule and that you had in the scope. It's very easy then for anyone reviewing it to see the commonalities between each one. Again, we are looking for very realistic estimates. We are not looking for overinflated numbers. We are going to be looking to see if you have a sense of how much realistically things might cost. Please note that our grant award amount, once it's awarded, there's no opportunity for it to be increased. And the amount that if you're awarded, the amount that the board awards is that set amount. So they will make that determination in May. In the project budget, we are not only looking for what you would do with the actual grant dollars that would be awarded, but also how you're meeting your 25% match. So that includes demonstrating all of the in-kind and monetary contributions from either your organization or a partner organization toward the project activities. We do have a recommended value to calculate the value of volunteer hours, which would be considered in kind. So volunteer hours means that the people performing that work are doing so without being paid, but we do use a value for their time. And I think that the link to that is included in the standard grant guidelines. And I'm not sure if anyone might be able to pull that from our website and drop it in the chat, but we, I think it's around $34 this year, but I would just refer to the standard grant guidelines. And then another thing that we will be checking, that's one of the minimum qualifications, is that the grant funding must be at least 80% implementation. So if you end up having like planning, design, and construction as your 3 tasks, then you know, at least 80% of how you're spending the funds must be toward that implementation or construction. So for any like educational projects, as long as it's toward like the actual implementation of the program, you know, even though you're not like constructing something, if it's creek cleanups, it's the implementation of actually cleaning up and doing outreach. So if you have questions about, you know, your percentages there, feel free to let us know. We as grant staff cannot, you know, tell you what to do, but we can help you interpret our grant guidelines. So that's what we are here for. Our next slide for the budget is to take a look at our budget template. So it is a set budget template, and yeah, we just wanted to show what is there in the Flux application. Again, this is also on our website under resources. So I'm going to walk through this from left to right and then from top to bottom. So starting at the very top, if you scroll up. Okay, so you'll see that you'll put in your organization name, your project name, and then across the top column headers, you'll see that the first gray column is the total project cost. So that's the total of the next 3 columns, which are in the navy blue, and that's the grantee or partner contributions, other contributions, and then your district funding request, what you're requesting for the grant. So we do need to see those things laid out. Then column C, the district funding request, that is broken out into the columns on the very right side under the light blue, under district funding only. You would tailor those tasks to fit the tasks that you have in your scope and schedule to match that and then fill that out. So everything kind of rolls up into that gray column. So the light blue column starting from the right all add up to column C, district funding request, and then the 3 columns under total project cost in the dark blue roll up into the gray column. So all of the formulas should be there, but we do encourage you to double check anything. And then going down from top to bottom, our first section is personnel services. So here we advise you to put in the labor hours for anyone who's employed by your specific organization. If you are working with a partner, their personnel and labor contributions would not be in personnel services. It would be under the other costs. So this is only for employees of the actual applicant organization. Please note that we have a limit of 20% of the benefits rate on top of that. And then we have the 10% indirect overhead limit on top of that salary plus benefits amount. So that is all the formulas are in the document. In the other cost section, that's going to be all your direct costs. So all of your supplies, anything like that. And we try to ask for it to be as detailed as possible. Again, if you have a subcontractor for something or have another partner that's going to be donating or paying for things, you can put those line items in the other costs. And then in other contributions down below in the following section, that can be your in-kind contributions. So for example, any volunteer hours, and then you could see you can update the value cost, and then it comes out and would be calculated along that row. And then the grand totals at the bottom will show the totals for each task and the total for the district funding request, and show the other contributions to the project to ensure that there's at least the 25% match. So that's our budget document in a nutshell. We understand it's very detailed, and there's a specifics that we're looking for here. So you do have any questions about how to fill this out, please feel free to reach out to us. All right, I think we can head to the next and final slide. Okay, so our other requirements that we'll be looking for in the Flux application is as much information as possible about the stage of environmental review or CEQA compliance of where you are. And we'll go through that in more detail later on in this presentation. If you've begun any permit reviews and what the status is of that, or if you know which permits you will need to conduct your activities. And then it looks like this is for the items upon award and before the agreement can be executed. So this is just a heads up, I think, of the items that we'll be looking for if your application gets awarded by the board, and what we'll be asking for at that time to move forward with executing an agreement. So that is the CEQA review. So we do need to see as much documentation of that. We, as a responsible agency, will do a review on the project of the lead agency's documentation, or do our own exempt review as well. And then we will, if there is a permit that requires a Valley Water permit, we will be able to assist with that if you're awarded. And then the insurance requirements that were listed in the standard grant guidelines, we will then be asking for that insurance documentation to ensure that it meets the requirements. And then after the award as well, we will work with the newly awarded grantee to update and complete the scope, schedule, and budget based on the amount that they're awarded, if they're awarded a percentage of what they requested. All right, so I know that was a lot. Happy to answer any questions. If we don't have any, then we can go right into the next slide, which I think I'll hand it over to Robert. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and talk about environmental compliance, specifically the CEQA review. So Valley Water must comply with the California Environmental Quality Act, which is also known as CEQA. CEQA requires Valley Water to analyze a project's potential environmental impact. Once the CEQA is complete, the CEQA is complete when the lead agency has filed a Notice of Determination, NOD, or upon documentation that the project qualifies for an exemption. Please be reminded that only a CEQA planner can determine the CEQA review that is required, and not grant staff. The grantee should provide a completed CEQA documents with their application if it is applicable and if it's available, or it must provide the following details in the application: project locations and access routes, any species and habitats that could be affected, ground disturbing activities, work schedule, potential environmental concerns that may exist. As a tip, provide as much detail as possible so that you don't lose any points and that there's less back and forth later on in the process. If you have your CEQA review started or completed, you are encouraged to provide it, even if you or Valley Water are not the lead agency. Another thing to note is that the size and cost of the project is not necessarily indicative of the required CEQA review, since each project is unique. Completed CEQA review is not required prior to the grant proposal submission or award. However, proposals that are further along in the process of CEQA review may score higher than those that are not based on the evaluation criteria in the grant guidelines. Excuse me. Again, if you have done any CEQA research, inquiries, permits, or studies, it's a good idea to include that. All right, moving on to permit compliance. So Valley Water requires that the grantee has proper permits before starting project activities on privately, publicly, or Valley Water owned property. Applicants who can show progress in obtaining the required permits are given more points based on the evaluation criteria in the grant guidelines. If you have any permits or permit applications in progress, please include those in your application as well. Our Community Project Review Unit, also known as CPRU, conducts the permitting reviews. Please contact us if you have any questions about permitting. Similar to the CEQA review, only CPRU or the permitting agencies can do a permit review, not grant staff. So please provide as much detail as you can. Again, you should provide any completed permit documents with your application if applicable, or if you are awarded, be prepared to submit the permits to Valley Water prior to performing the scope of work. All right, lastly, the grants will require insurance for the entire agreement term. If you look at attachment 4, it will lay out all the grantee insurance requirements, which is also listed in the grant guidelines. You can send this attachment to your broker to get a quote and an idea of how long it will take to get all of these endorsements. Depending on your project, the insurance requirements may be adjusted as needed on a case-by-case basis. It's important to note that all insurance endorsements require approval before executing the agreement. So once you submit the insurance to us, Valley Water needs to review and approve it to ensure it meets the requirements. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Peggy to go over the evaluation and funding.
Thank you, Robert. So once you've submitted your proposal in Flux, a pre-review will be conducted to ensure that it meets the minimum requirements before it can be evaluated by our evaluation panel. It does meet the requirements. The subject matter experts on the evaluation panel will evaluate the applications and recommend grant awards based on the criteria for your project type. And again, that can be found in the grant guidelines. So make sure to read it thoroughly. Take a look at the scoring criteria. It's all there. But yeah, you want to review the minimum requirements and the project evaluation criteria. The evaluation panel will use the grant funding allocation matrix for the project type. So grant staff, we have no decision or influence on the scoring. The scoring is done by the panel, and the award recommendations are based on the funding allocation matrix. Each project type has different point values, and it's all included in the guidelines for your benefit. As far as scoring, there's also an opportunity for bonus points. There's going to be a total of 15 bonus points available for the following categories. And each category has 5 points available. So the first one is financial stability. And this is if more than half of the project's required funds come from a monetary source, which is not in kind, and also demonstration of a strong financial ability to carry out the project. The second category is if you are a first-time standard grant recipient. So this excludes prior mini grants as well as refill station grants. And then thirdly, we have environmental justice, and this is for projects that serve or impact a disadvantaged community. And on the next slide, we have the definition of a disadvantaged community. So that includes low-income households, which are household incomes below 80% of the area median income in the county. And then also based on the low-income census tracts. So this is where the aggregated household incomes are less than 80% of the area median income for the county. There's some links here in the slides, and it'll be in the FAQ as well. And it's in the standard grant guidelines. And then as far as the third area, that's the area defined by the California Environmental Protection Agency. And that's the map that was proposed for SB 535. We also have a link from Valley Water that combines all of these requirements. And so if you look up your project location on that map and it's on either one of the maps, you would automatically get the 5 points. You don't get extra points for being on both maps, and you don't lose points for not being on both maps. Next slide. So as far as funding and reminders, the funds can't be used for pre-award costs or proprietary work of which results cannot be released to the public. The funds are provided on a reimbursement basis. So after you're awarded the funds and the agreement is executed, we will pay out the grant activities after an invoice is submitted, reviewed, and approved. And lastly, it is possible that the final 10% of your grant award amount may be retained until project completion, and that this is just to ensure that the entire project that was funded is completed. Next slide. Again, we are only accepting applications through Flux. You can see the sign-in page here. You can also just start registering now. So you want to hit the create an account button down here and start your registration. It could take up to a couple of days for us to approve your registration. So if you want to go ahead and start registering and test out Flux, give yourself some time. If you have any questions, you can set up a meeting with us individually and we can help you through the process. And then if you have any questions, you're welcome to come to our future workshops to ask any of these questions. And we're also available to meet over Zoom to do screen share and go over how to use Flux with you as well. Also on page 55 of the standard grant guidelines, we do have detailed instructions on how to use Flux. Thanks, Robert. Okay, so just some important reminders. You know, we've been mentioning the grant guidelines the entire presentation today. So that's what these reminders are pertaining to. So yeah, just read the grant guidelines, develop your proposal, and get all of the required proposal documents as instructed in the grant guidelines. And then we also have an FAQ. The one for this year hasn't been published yet, but it should be shortly. But yeah, so just be on the lookout for the FAQ document that will have important information in it as well. And then our last tip is to begin your application early. You can attend our future workshops with any questions, and just a reminder that proposals will not be accepted after the due date and time. Now I'll turn it over to Chelsea to talk about our other grant opportunities.
Thanks, Peggy. So in addition to our standard grants, we have 3 other funding opportunities. The first one here on the slide is the mini grant program, which has a $5,000 grants allocation per project available year-round or until funding has been dispersed. So we have about $100,000 available for mini grants, which resets each fiscal year. These smaller grants are meant to provide seed funding to encourage community engagement in activities that further safe, clean drinking water, water conservation, flood protection, and environmental stewardship in Santa Clara County. So if you want to pilot a small project before expanding it or need help kickstarting a project, this is a great funding opportunity for that. Some examples of mini grants projects are educational programs for school-aged children to teach them about the safe, clean water benefits, school gardens, educational hiking trips, cleanup activities, and much more. You can view the entire list of previously awarded grants at the links we provided earlier. The mini grant application must as well be submitted in Flux using a streamlined process. And unlike standard grants, it is not reimbursement based, so you receive 50% of the funds upfront once you've been awarded and we execute your agreement, and then the remaining 50% once you completed the project and submit the final report. We are dropping the link to the mini grant program in the chat, so please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And I am the lead for this grant opportunity and I'm available to provide assistance or meet with you individually. Next, we have our refill station grant, which is led by Robert on our team. This funding opportunity is structured very similarly to the mini grants. The refill station grants are $5,000 grant per project based on the location of the installment and is available year-round until funding has been dispersed. And we have $100,000 available for refill stations, which resets every fiscal year. The purpose of this grant is to provide funding for the installation of water bottle refill stations to expand drinking water access throughout Santa Clara County, especially in economically underserved communities or locations serving school-aged children and students. This is a streamlined application that's submitted in Flux, and we have an agreement process for this one as well. It is also not reimbursement based. You'll receive 50% of the funds up front and the remaining 50 once the installment is complete and the final items are submitted. The $5,000 is the full award amount, so it can cover the purchase of the refill station unit, the installment costs, and the future maintenance. We are dropping the refill station website link in the chat if you want to learn more about this opportunity. And lastly, we have small city partnerships, which doesn't have a dedicated slide, but the funding for this opportunity varies. And it allows us to partner with small cities on projects or programs that further the safe, clean water priorities. Please reach out to us directly if you have any questions about this opportunity. And finally, here's our contact information also included in the chat. Feel free to email or call. If you have any questions, emails checked frequently by our staff for the quickest response. If you have questions unique to your project, please feel free to schedule a meeting with us by using our Calendly link on our website, which is our online scheduling tool that finds the best times to meet with any of our staff. And again, for transparency, we cannot review your application before submittal or tell you if your project will be awarded. That's up to the evaluation panel to recommend and ultimately the board to decide. But we can provide general guidance and clarify any of the requirements needed for your proposal or clarify anything from the grant's guidelines. And lastly, please fill out our workshop survey using the Survey Monkey link in the chat. We will also email this link after the workshop. Your feedback will help us improve our future workshops. So this concludes our presentation today. Thank you for joining us. But before we end the workshop, we do have some time to answer any questions. So feel free to raise your hand or ask them in the Q&A box. We also have our evaluation panel members that introduced themselves in the beginning of the presentation. If you have any questions about CEQA, insurance, or permitting. I don't see anything yet, but if you do have one, you can type it in or raise your hand. So if there are no questions, we again thank you for being here today and look forward to working with you if you end up applying.